The forest moon of Kepler 442b had seen many things in its ancient existence, but nothing quite like the sight that unfolded beneath its twin suns that day. Sarah Chen pressed her back against the rough bark of what the xenobiology team had dubbed a crystal tree, a towering organism that seemed part plant, part mineral, its translucent trunk catching and refracting the amber light filtering through the canopy above. Her breathing came in short, controlled bursts. 3 days. 3 days since the Krill raiders had descended upon the research station like a nightmare made flesh. 3 days since she had watched her colleagues fall one by one to those massive, brutish aliens that looked like some twisted fusion of gorilla and insect. 3 days since she had managed to escape into the alien wilderness with nothing but her emergency pack and the clothes on her back. The Krill were hunters by nature, and Sarah knew they would not give up easily. The research team had learned that much during their 6 months studying this world. These creatures were apex predators, standing nearly 8 feet tall with arms that could snap a human in half. Their dark, chitinous skin gleamed like obsidian, and their 4 yellow eyes could track movement across impossible distances. But it was their intelligence that made them truly terrifying. They used tools, strategy, and worst of all, they seemed to take genuine pleasure in the hunt. A branch cracked somewhere to her left, and Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She peered around the crystal tree, scanning the alien undergrowth for any sign of movement. The forest here was unlike anything on Earth. Bioluminescent fungi dotted the ground like fallen stars, while overhead, creatures that resembled flying jellyfish drifted between the branches, their transparent bodies pulsing with soft blue light. Another sound, closer this time. The distinctive grunt-click communication of the Krill. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to remember everything Dr. Martinez had taught them about the species. They hunted in packs of 3 to 5 individuals. They could track by scent, but their vision was based on movement. Most importantly, they viewed humans as inferior beings, playthings to be captured alive for their twisted entertainment. When Sarah opened her eyes again, she saw them. 5 krill emerged from the undergrowth like living shadows, their massive forms moving with surprising grace through the alien foliage. The pack leader, distinguished by the crude metal ornaments piercing his thick hide, raised his head and sniffed the air. His 4 eyes swept the area methodically, and Sarah knew with cold certainty that her hiding place had been compromised. She had 2 choices: run and be hunted down within minutes, or surrender and hope they wanted her alive. Neither option offered much hope, but Sarah had not survived 3 days in hostile alien territory by giving up easily. Her hand moved to the small plasma cutter on her belt, designed for taking geological samples, but it might serve as a weapon if necessary. The krill spread out in a practiced hunting formation, their guttural communication filling the forest air. Sarah could see now that they carried weapons, crude but effective spears tipped with sharpened bone, and what looked like nets woven from some kind of metallic fiber. They definitely intended to take her alive. The pack leader gestured with one massive arm, and 2 of the krill began moving to flank her position. Sarah's mind raced. She had studied these creatures for months, learned their behavior patterns, their social structure. But knowing about them and facing them in person were 2 entirely different things. Up close, they were even more intimidating than the research footage had suggested. Their muscular forms radiated predatory confidence, and the way they moved spoke of countless successful hunts. A twig snapped behind her, and Sarah spun around to find herself face to face with one of the flanking krill. The creature's 4 eyes fixed on her with unmistakable intelligence, and its mandible-like mouth parts spread in what might have been a smile. It raised its spear, but not to strike. Instead, it pointed the weapon at her in a clear gesture of dominance. "Human," the krill spoke, its voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in its chest. The universal translator implanted behind Sarah's ear struggled with the alien phonemes before rendering the words comprehensible. You run well for soft skin, but hunt is over now. More of the pack emerged from the undergrowth, forming a loose circle around Sarah's position. She found herself in the center of a ring of alien predators, each one capable of killing her with casual ease. The pack leader stepped forward, towering over her even at a distance of several yards. His ornaments caught the filtered sunlight, and Sarah could see now that they were not merely decorative. Some appeared to be trophies, bits of bone and metal that might once have belonged to other victims. I am Graktul, the leader announced, his chest swelling with pride. Hunter of soft skins, breaker of the running prey. He gestured to his packmates. We have followed your scent trail for 3 sun cycles. You have provided good sport, human. For this, we will grant you the honor of feeding the young spawn before your death. Sarah's blood ran cold. She had heard the research team's theories about krill reproduction, the horrifying possibility that they used living hosts to incubate their offspring. The thought of such a fate made her stomach churn, but she forced herself to remain calm. These creatures respected strength, Dr. Martinez had noted, show fear, and they would toy with her for days, show defiance, and they might grant her a quicker end. But as Sarah looked around at the circle of alien predators, she realized that she had one advantage they did not expect. The research team had not just studied the krill, they had studied their entire ecosystem. They had mapped the complex relationships between predator and prey, learned about the delicate balance that kept this world functioning. And Sarah, as the team's xenolinguist and cultural specialist, had discovered something that the krill themselves might not fully understand. She straightened her shoulders and looked directly into Graktul's 4 yellow eyes. The pack leader's mandibles spread wider, clearly amused by this display of defiance from such a small, weak creature. You mock the hunt leader with your stare, soft skin, Graktul rumbled. Perhaps you do not understand your position. You are prey. We are hunters. This is the way of things. The other krill chittered their agreement, a sound like breaking glass mixed with insect clicks. Sarah could see the anticipation in their postures. They were looking forward to whatever came next. But she also noticed something else, something that gave her the first glimmer of hope she had felt in days. Carved into the bark of several nearby trees were symbols, marks that the research team had initially dismissed as natural scarring. But Sarah had spent weeks studying similar markings around the krill territory, and she had begun to suspect they were more than random scratches. They had a pattern, a meaning that went deeper than simple territorial markers. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the alien forest. I know about the deep calling, Graktul. I know about the voice that comes from stone. The effect of her words was immediate and dramatic. Every krill in the pack froze, their bodies going rigid with what Sarah could only interpret as shock. Graktul's 4 eyes narrowed to slits, and the ornaments on his hide began to rattle as his entire body trembled. Impossible! He hissed, taking a step backward. Soft skin cannot know the forbidden words, cannot speak of things that are sealed. But Sarah pressed on, her voice growing stronger as she saw the uncertainty creeping into the aliens' postures. The markings on the trees, Graktul, they are not territory markers, they are prayers. Requests for forgiveness from something your people did long ago. The pack leader's spear clattered to the ground, and Sarah knew she had struck something vital. The other krill were backing away now, their confident hunting formation dissolving into confusion and fear. Whatever she had touched upon, it ran deeper than their predatory instincts. You will be silent, Graktul roared, but there was desperation in his voice now rather than authority. The soft skin knows nothing. The old ways are buried. The shame is forgotten. Sarah felt a surge of understanding wash over her. The research team had been wrong about so much. The krill were not simple predators. They were a species carrying the weight of some ancient guilt, some terrible mistake that had shaped their entire culture. And somehow, in studying their language and symbols, she had stumbled upon the key to that secret. The forest around them seemed to grow quieter, as if even the alien wildlife sensed the shift in the atmosphere. Sarah could see other creatures watching from the shadows, things with too many legs and eyes that glowed in the dim light beneath the canopy. But for the first time since her capture, she felt like she might have a chance. "What happened here, Graktul?" she asked quietly. "What did your ancestors do that still haunts you?" The massive alien's breathing became labored, and Sarah realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented. A krill experiencing what could only be described as a panic attack. The confident predator who had been preparing to drag her back to his nest was now struggling to remain upright. "The Makers," Graktul whispered, his voice barely audible. We destroyed the Makers, the ones who shaped this world, the ones who gave us the gift of thought." And with those words, Sarah understood that everything was about to change. She had not just stumbled upon some minor cultural taboo, she had discovered the central trauma that had shaped an entire species. The krill were not just hunters. They were a people living with the weight of genocide, the knowledge that they had destroyed their own creators. The implications hit her like a physical blow. If the research team had known this, their entire approach to studying the krill would have been different. These creatures were not just intelligent predators. They were survivors of a civilization-destroying catastrophe, driven to hunt and kill by trauma that stretched back generations. As the pack of alien hunters stood frozen in the growing twilight, Sarah realized that her chances of survival had just improved dramatically. But more than that, she might have uncovered the key to understanding not just the krill, but the entire history of this strange and beautiful world. The twin suns were beginning to set, casting long shadows through the crystal trees. Soon it would be dark, and in the darkness, anything might be possible. Sarah looked at each of the krill in turn, seeing them now not as monsters but as broken individuals carrying an unbearable burden. "Tell me about the Makers, Graktul," she said softly. "Tell me how it really happened." Graktul collapsed to his knees, his massive frame shaking with emotions that Sarah had never imagined these creatures capable of feeling. The other pack members followed suit, their weapons abandoned as they too sank into postures of submission and grief. The transformation was so complete, so sudden, that Sarah felt as though she had stepped into an entirely different reality. "You should not have spoken those words, Softskin," Graktul said, his voice broken and raw. "They carry the weight of 10,000 cycles of shame. They burn the mouth that speaks them and poison the air that carries them." Sarah remained standing, acutely aware that despite their apparent emotional collapse, any one of these creatures could still kill her without effort. But something in their behavior told her that the immediate danger had passed. She was witnessing something sacred and terrible, a moment that revealed the true nature of the krill species. "The Makers," Graktul continued, his 4 eyes fixed on the ground before him. "They were beautiful, so beautiful that to look upon them was like gazing into the heart of creation itself. They were tall and graceful, with skin that shone like starlight and voices that could make the very stones weep with joy." As the alien hunter spoke, the other pack members began to chant in low, mournful tones. Sarah's translator struggled with the ancient words, catching only fragments, something about forgiveness, about debt unpaid, about children who had betrayed their parents. "They found us when we were nothing more than beasts," Graktul said, "creatures of fang and claw, living in caves and fighting over scraps. We had no language, no tools, no understanding of the world beyond our next meal. But the Makers saw something in us that we could not see in ourselves. They lifted us up, They gave us words, thoughts, the ability to shape our world rather than simply survive in it. Sarah sank down to her own knees, instinctively matching the posture of the aliens around her. She could feel the weight of this revelation settling over her like a physical presence. The research team had theorized about the Krill's origins, but they had never imagined anything like this. For generations beyond counting, we lived alongside them, Graktul continued. They taught us everything, how to work metal, how to read the patterns of the stars, how to heal sickness and injury. They showed us art, music, poetry. They gave us souls, soft skin. They made us into people. One of the other Krill, a smaller individual with intricate scarring across his hide, spoke up for the first time. I am Velkoth, he said, his voice heavy with grief. Keeper of the memory songs. I remember what my grandmother's grandmother whispered in the darkness. The makers never asked for anything in return. They gave freely, without condition or demand. They loved us as parents love their children. Sarah felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She was beginning to understand the magnitude of what had happened here, and it was almost too terrible to contemplate. What changed? She asked quietly. What went wrong? Graktul's breathing became even more labored, and Sarah could see that speaking these words was causing him physical pain. Fear, he whispered. Fear and pride and the poison whispers of those who sought power over others. The pack leader struggled to continue, his massive hands clenching and unclenching as he fought to get the words out. There were some among us who began to question why the makers held themselves apart, why they would not share all their secrets, all their knowledge. These questioners spoke of conspiracy, of hidden motives. They said the makers kept us as pets, as amusing creatures to be studied and controlled. Velkoth picked up the story, his voice barely above a whisper. The questioners found others who would listen. They spread their poison words through our communities like a plague. They said that true freedom could only come through independence, that we would never be more than children as long as we accepted the Maker's guidance. Sarah could see where this was leading, and her heart sank. It was the oldest story in the universe. The student who turns against the teacher, the child who rebels against the parent, the civilization that destroys its benefactors in the name of independence. The rebellion began with small acts of defiance, Graktul said, rejecting Maker teaching, destroying their gifts, claiming territory that had always been shared. The Makers were confused, hurt. They tried to understand what had gone wrong, tried to heal the growing rift. But the questioners had already decided that compromise was weakness. The alien hunter's voice broke completely then, and Sarah watched in amazement as tears began to flow from his 4 eyes. She had not known that Krill could weep, but the evidence was undeniable. These creatures were capable of grief that ran deeper than anything she had imagined. The final betrayal came during the Festival of Two Suns, Velkoth continued when Graktul could not go on. A celebration that had been observed for 1,000 cycles, a time when Makers and Krill came together in joy and gratitude. The questioners chose that moment to strike, when the Makers were defenseless, when they trusted us completely. Sarah closed her eyes, not wanting to hear what came next, but knowing that she had to. These creatures were opening their deepest wound to her, sharing the most shameful moment in their species' history. She owed them the respect of witnessing their pain. We killed them all, Graktul said, the words falling like stones into still water. Every last Maker on this world, men, women, children, none were spared. We used the weapons they had taught us to forge, turned their own gifts against them. And when it was over, when their beautiful voices were silenced forever, we realized what we had done. The chanting of the other pack members grew louder, more desperate. Sarah could hear the anguish in their alien voices, the grief that had been passed down through countless generations. The knowledge they had given us began to fade, Velkoth explained. Not all at once, but slowly, like sand flowing through our fingers. Without the makers to guide us, to help us understand the deeper meanings of what they had taught, we lost the ability to maintain their gifts. Our cities crumbled, our art became crude, our science devolved into superstition. Sarah opened her eyes and looked around at the pack of alien hunters. She could see now that their crude weapons and simple ornaments were pale shadows of what they had once been capable of creating. These creatures were the descendants of a great civilization, reduced to barbarism by their own actions. "We became what we are now," Graktul said, finally able to speak again. "Hunters and killers, driven by instincts we can no longer fully control. The questioners had promised that destroying the makers would set us free, but instead it made us into slaves. Slaves to our own guilt, our own shame, our own diminished nature." "Why didn't you try to rebuild?" Sarah asked. "Why not attempt to recover what was lost?" Velkoth laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Many tried, in the early cycles after the Maker's death. But their knowledge was not just information, soft skin. It was wisdom, understanding that could only be gained through patient teaching and gradual growth. We had shortcuts to power without the wisdom to use it responsibly. Every attempt to reclaim our lost glory ended in disaster." The alien's scarred hide caught the fading light as he gestured toward the crystal trees around them. "These trees, for example. The Makers taught our ancestors to grow them, to shape living crystal into structures of incredible beauty and strength. But when we tried to recreate their techniques after the genocide, we created monsters instead, plants that consumed everything around them, crystals that exploded with deadly force. The forest you see now is carefully maintained by techniques we barely understand, a pale echo of gardens that once covered this entire continent." Sarah felt a deep sadness settling over her, but also a growing understanding. The research team had interpreted the krill's aggressive behavior as natural predatory instincts. But the truth was far more complex. These creatures were acting out a cycle of violence that began with the greatest crime their species had ever committed. "The pack hunting," she said, pieces clicking into place in her mind. "The territorial aggression, the treatment of other species as prey. It's all connected to what happened to the Makers." Graktul nodded heavily. "We hunt because we can no longer create. We kill because we cannot heal the wound we opened in ourselves. Every prey animal reminds us of our own victims, and yet we cannot stop ourselves from repeating the pattern." "And the markings on the trees?" Sarah asked. "Prayers," Velkoth confirmed. "Begging the spirits of the Makers to forgive us, to show us a way back to what we once were. But the Makers are gone, and their spirits do not answer." Sarah looked around at the assembled aliens, seeing them with completely new eyes. They were not monsters or simple predators. They were survivors of a spiritual catastrophe, a species trapped in a cycle of self-destruction that stretched back thousands of years. "How many of your people know the truth?" she asked. "All of us," Graktul replied. "The memory songs ensure that every krill learns the story of our shame before they reach maturity. We cannot forget, and we cannot forgive ourselves. But most choose not to speak of it," Velkoth added. "The knowledge is too painful, too heavy to carry in daily life. It is easier to hunt, to kill, to pretend that this is simply our nature rather than our curse." Sarah stood up slowly, her mind racing. She was beginning to understand why the research team's attempts at communication had failed so completely. They had approached the krill as they might approach any other species, looking for common ground, shared interests, mutual benefits. But how do you negotiate with a species that considers itself damned? "There's something else," she said carefully. "Something that you need to know about humans, about why I was here with the research team." The pack members looked up at her with renewed attention. Grak'tul's 4 eyes narrowed, but not with hostility, with curiosity. "We came here to learn from you," Sarah continued. "My species has made mistakes too, Grak'tul. We've destroyed our own environments, wiped out countless other species, turned weapons against each other in wars that served no purpose but pride and greed. We're not innocent, and we're not perfect." She gestured toward the alien forest around them, with its strange beauty and hidden complexity. "But we've also learned something that your people seem to have forgotten. We've learned that mistakes, even terrible ones, don't have to define us forever. We've learned that redemption is possible, that broken things can sometimes be fixed." Grak'tul rose to his feet, his massive frame towering over Sarah once again. But there was no threat in his posture now, only a desperate kind of hope. "You speak of redemption, soft skin," he said, "but you do not understand the magnitude of our crime. We did not simply kill our benefactors, we murdered the only beings in the universe who truly loved us." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "And yet you're still here. Your species survived. You maintained some of the Maker's knowledge, even if it's incomplete. You remember their teachings, even if you can't fully follow them. That has to count for something." The twilight was deepening around them, and the bioluminescent plants were beginning to glow more brightly. In the distance, Sarah could hear the calls of night-hunting creatures beginning their own ancient cycles, but for the first time since her capture, she felt like she was part of something larger than simple predator and prey. "Tell me more about the Makers," she said. "Tell me everything you remember. Maybe together we can find a way forward that honors their memory instead of perpetuating the cycle of violence." And as the twin moons began to rise over the alien forest, 6 species from different worlds sat together in the growing darkness, sharing stories that might just hold the key to healing wounds that had festered for thousands of years. The night brought revelations that transformed everything Sarah thought she knew about the universe. As the pack of Krill warriors shared their ancestral memories under the light of twin moons, she began to understand that the Makers had been far more than just another advanced species. They had been something approaching divinity made manifest. "Show her the sanctuary," Velkoth urged Grak'tul as the night deepened. "If we are truly to trust the soft skin with our deepest shame, let her see what we have guarded all these cycles." Grak'tul hesitated, his 4 eyes reflecting the strange bioluminescent glow of the forest floor. "The sacred place has not been witnessed by outsider eyes since the Great Betrayal. To bring a human there would violate oaths sworn in the blood of our ancestors." "Our ancestors were oath-breakers and murderers," another pack member spoke up. This was Theknal, who had remained silent throughout the evening's confessions. "Perhaps it is time to break oaths that serve only to preserve our guilt." Sarah sensed the gravity of whatever decision they were contemplating. The Krill had spent hours sharing fragments of their history, but she could tell they were holding back something crucial, some final secret that might explain everything. "I don't want to force you to betray your beliefs," she said carefully. "But if there's something that might help both our species understand each other better, maybe it's worth the risk." Grak'tul stood and paced among the crystal trees, his massive form casting strange shadows in the alien moonlight. Finally, he stopped and turned to face the group. "Very well," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "If we are to be truly judged for our crimes, let the judgment be complete. We will show you the place where the last Maker died." The journey through the nocturnal forest was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The Krill moved with surprising grace through terrain that would have been impossible for human feet to navigate, occasionally lifting her bodily over obstacles or across ravines. Their earlier hostility had been replaced by something approaching reverence, as if her willingness to listen to their story had fundamentally altered her status in their eyes. As they traveled, Velkoth continued sharing fragments of Maker lore. They could speak to the crystal trees directly, he explained, running his scarred hand along a massive trunk that pulsed with inner light at his touch. Not with words, but with something deeper. They could convince living stone to grow in specific patterns, persuade metals to take new forms without heat or force. It sounds like they had technology we can't even imagine, Sarah said, struggling to keep up with the aliens' longer stride. Not technology, Graktul corrected from ahead of them. Understanding. The Makers saw the universe as a living thing, not a collection of objects to be manipulated. They worked with the natural forces instead of trying to dominate them. They climbed higher into the hills, following paths that seemed to have been carved from the living rock itself. Sarah could see now that the entire landscape bore subtle signs of ancient engineering. Waterways that flowed in impossibly elegant curves, rock formations that seemed too perfect to be natural, groves of trees arranged in patterns that spoke of intelligent design. This whole region was their garden, Teknal explained, noticing her amazement. Every stream, every grove, every stone was placed with purpose. They didn't build cities the way your kind does. They sculpted the landscape itself into something that served both beauty and function. After several hours of climbing, they reached a plateau that took Sarah's breath away. Before them stood the ruins of something that might once have been a temple, but unlike any religious structure she had ever seen. The building seemed to grow from the rock itself, its walls flowing upward in organic curves that suggested both architecture and sculpture. Despite obvious damage and millennia of weathering, it remained breathtakingly beautiful. "The Sanctuary of Final Songs," Graktul announced, his voice barely above a whisper. "Here is where the last Maker made her final stand." As they approached the structure, Sarah could see that the damage had not been caused by time alone. Scorch marks blackened sections of the crystalline walls, and what might once have been elegant spires lay broken and scattered across the plaza. This was the site of a battle, and the attackers had clearly been determined to leave nothing intact. "Her name was Liralai," Velkoth said, his voice taking on the cadence of formal recitation. "She was the youngest of the Maker Council, barely past the age of first wisdom. When the rebellion began, she tried to negotiate, to find some way to heal the growing rift between our peoples." They entered the sanctuary through a doorway that had been partially collapsed by some ancient explosion. Inside, Sarah gasped at what she saw. The walls were covered with murals that seemed to move in the moonlight, depicting scenes of incredible beauty and complexity. Krill and Makers worked side by side in these images, sharing knowledge, creating wonders that defied description. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Sarah realized that many of the murals had been deliberately defaced. Crude weapons had been used to scratch out faces, to destroy scenes of cooperation and replace them with symbols of domination. "The rebels did this," Graktul confirmed, seeing her horror. "They wanted to erase all evidence of what we had lost, to make it easier to pretend that the Makers had never been worthy of our respect." In the center of the sanctuary stood a raised dais, and upon it rested something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. It was clearly a sarcophagus of some kind, but unlike any burial marker she had ever seen. The crystalline structure seemed to contain light itself, swirling patterns of luminescence that pulsed in rhythm with some undetectable heartbeat. "She is here," Velkoth said simply. "The last Maker. She died trying to protect the children, both her own kind and ours, when the killing began." Sarah approached the sarcophagus with reverence, acutely aware that she was looking upon the remains of a being whose death had shaped the destiny of an entire world. The light patterns within the crystal grew brighter as she drew near, and she had the unsettling sensation that something was responding to her presence. The rebels cornered her here, Graktul continued, his voice thick with emotion. She could have fought back. The Makers possessed abilities that could have turned the very ground against us. But she chose not to. Even as our ancestors closed in with weapons of bone and metal, she tried to reason with them. "What did she say?" Sarah asked, unable to take her eyes off the swirling lights within the crystal tomb. Theknal stepped forward, his scarred hide gleaming in the sanctuary's strange radiance. Her final words are preserved in the memory songs. She said, "I forgive you, my children. May you someday learn to forgive yourselves." The impact of those words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Here was a being who had been betrayed by those she had helped create, hunted down and killed by her own children, and her last act had been to offer forgiveness. "And then," Sarah whispered. "Then Grakvor the Kinslayer drove his spear through her heart," Graktul said, the name falling from his lips like a curse. "My own ancestor whose blood runs in my veins, the first among us to taste the poison of rebellion, and the last to realize its true cost." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she looked around at the damaged sanctuary. The magnitude of what had been lost here was almost incomprehensible. Not just the death of an individual, but the murder of hope itself. But as she stood there in the presence of Lyralei's tomb, something extraordinary began to happen. The light patterns within the crystal started to change, swirling faster and brighter than before. And suddenly, Sarah could hear something. Not with her ears, but with something deeper. A voice that seemed to come from the very stones around her. "She speaks," Velkoth gasped, falling to his knees. "The last Maker speaks." The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It was simply present, carrying within it depths of compassion that Sarah had never imagined possible. "The circle turns," the voice said, and somehow Sarah knew that everyone present could hear it. "The children return seeking forgiveness that was already given long ago." Graktul collapsed beside the sarcophagus, his massive frame shaking with sobs. "We destroyed you," he wailed. "We destroyed everything beautiful you gave us. How can you forgive what cannot be forgiven?" "Because forgiveness is not earned," the voice replied gently. "It is given freely as all love is given. You have carried your guilt for countless generations, my children. But guilt was never meant to be a chain. It was meant to be a teacher." Sarah found herself speaking, though she had not planned to. "What can we do? How can we help them heal from what was done?" The presence within the crystal seemed to focus on her with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. "You already know, young human. Your species has walked this path before. You have learned that the greatest crimes can become the foundation for the greatest wisdom, if those who follow are willing to build something better upon the ruins of what was destroyed." Around the sanctuary, Sarah could see that the damaged murals were beginning to change. The scratched-out faces were becoming clear again, the destroyed scenes of cooperation restored to their original beauty. But more than that, new images were appearing, pictures of humans and krill working together, of knowledge being shared across species, of wounds being healed through understanding. "The Maker's knowledge is not lost," the voice continued. "It lives in the quantum patterns of every atom in this world, waiting for those with wisdom enough to read it. But it can only be accessed by those who approach it with humility and respect, qualities your ancestors abandoned in their pride, but which you have the chance to reclaim." Velkoth raised his scarred head, hope flickering in his 4 eyes. "You would trust us again, after what we did?" "Trust is rebuilt one choice at a time," the presence replied. "But yes, my children, if you are willing to learn from your mistakes rather than simply repeating them, the path forward remains open." Sarah felt understanding flooding through her like a revelation. "The research station," she said suddenly. "The attack on my team, it wasn't just random violence, was it? You were testing us." Graktul looked up at her with surprise and something that might have been shame. "The pack leaders have debated for many cycles whether your kind could be trusted. Some believed that all intelligent species would eventually follow the path of betrayal, as we did. Others hoped that perhaps you might prove different." "The hunt was a test," Teknal confirmed. "If you had shown fear, if you had begged for mercy or tried to bargain for your life, we would have known that your species was driven by the same selfishness that corrupted us. But when you spoke the forbidden words, when you showed that you had taken the time to truly understand us, you revealed that your people possessed something we lost long ago," Velkoth finished. "The wisdom to see beyond surface appearances, to seek understanding rather than dominance." The presence within the crystal grew brighter, and Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with physical temperature. "The partnership begins here," Lyrale's voice said. "Human curiosity guided by Krill wisdom, Krill's strength directed by human compassion. Together, you can rebuild what was lost and create something even greater." Sarah looked around at the pack of alien warriors who had, just hours ago, been preparing to drag her back to their nest as prey. Now she saw them clearly for what they really were, survivors of a great tragedy, carrying wounds that had never been allowed to heal, but also beings capable of profound depth, of loyalty, of love that ran deeper than any human emotion she had ever experienced. "Where do we start?" she asked. Graktul rose to his feet, and Sarah was amazed to see that his 4 eyes held a light she had never seen there before. "We start by doing what should have been done long ago," he said. "We stop running from our shame and begin the work of redemption." "The research station," Velkoth added, understanding immediately. "We will help you rebuild it, but this time as a place of true cooperation. Your scientists will study not just our behavior, but our history, our culture, our dreams for the future. And we will learn from them," Teknal continued. "Their knowledge of the universe, their technologies, their ways of solving problems without violence. Perhaps together we can finally unlock the secrets the Makers left behind." The voice from the crystal spoke one final time, its words carrying the weight of prophecy. "The cycle of violence ends here, in this place where it began. From the ashes of betrayal, let understanding grow. From the soil of regret, let forgiveness bloom. And from the partnership of 2 wounded species, let healing spread to all the worlds that yearn for peace." As the twin moon set behind the crystal trees and the first light of dawn began to touch the sanctuary walls, Sarah found herself surrounded not by alien predators, but by friends who had walked through their darkest hour and emerged ready to build something better. The hunt was over, but the real adventure was just beginning. In the months that followed, the restored research station became something unprecedented in galactic history. A true collaboration between species, where humans and Krill worked side by side to unlock the mysteries their 2 peoples had separately failed to solve. And slowly, carefully, with patience and wisdom earned through great suffering, they began to resurrect the lost knowledge of the Makers, not to recreate the past, but to build a future worthy of those who had given everything to make it possible. The deadly alien apes who had once hunted humans through alien forests had become something far more valuable, partners in the greatest endeavor any species could undertake, the search for redemption, understanding, and hope among the stars.